Okay, thank you. I really appreciate I appreciate that. So now we're recording. Anonymous attendee says, is GitHub built entirely in Rails? For the most part, yeah, the main application is a Rails application. So there are a couple external applications, most recent ones, they're maybe built in like Go, but they're only very small microservice type applications. The actual application that you interact with, github.com, is a Rails website. R. Raso says, I have a question about today's session. When we created a new chat with link to new chat path, we didn't define the new path method in the chats controller. But when we created a new message with link to new message, we defined a new method. You should always define the method. I think it might work if you don't, but you should always define it because it's clearer that way. So if I failed to define it, that's just a mistake on my part. You should define it. Anonymous attendee says, how did you link the songs to the album? I will show that in a minute. Anonymous attendee says, is it ideal to use ID in chronological production apps? I'm not sure what you're asking there, but if you're asking, is it ideal to use ID for sorting things chronologically? I think probably I would say no. I think practically it will work, but you should sort instead by a timestamp. Anonymous attendee says, why does update need to be in before action? Yes, because the edit action and the before actions are completely independent. So remember, the edit action is the one where you go and see the form, and the update action is the one where it actually goes and updates. So let me try to show that. When first you go, I don't remember where we did update, but first you go just to one that has the form. That'll be the edit action. And then when you actually click update, that update goes to the server and sends the update action. So the reason that they both need to be in before action is because they both need a reference to the model object. And I'll try to describe that a bit more as I go through the exercise once the code space comes up. Rob says, is there a difference between creating a new method and a create method in the controller? Yeah, I think this is kind of a variant on the same question. So I'll try to cover that. It's you need both, and I will try to show why you need both in a minute. Felipe says, Ruby is an interpreting language. Is there a way to solve the situation that bugs are discovered by the customers sometimes? I'm not sure what you mean. I think that there are pros and cons to Ruby being an interpreted language, which we can talk about at the end of the class if you'd like to discuss it more. Anonymous attendee says, is it ideal to use ID for URL in production apps? I think that a lot of apps do this. A lot of apps use IDs. But if you want friendly apps, I did cover yesterday how to use the to_param method to get nicer looking URLs. Anonymous attendee says, is it possible to make a form which calls a specific method? For example, a delete, which calls a delete method in the controller, a delete form. Yes, it is. All you would do is you would add the URL parameter to the form for call, and then it would send the form to that place instead. Rajesh says, why does update need? Okay, I'm going to cover that in a minute. Dash says, I'm stuck at messages equals chat.messages. Error says messages not defined. If you get messages not defined, that means that @chat is equal to nil. A couple of people messaged with me with this problem. That could mean a couple different things, but what it really means is that in the database, there is no object with that name. So you either need to create it, or maybe you have created it, but you use like a different casing. So some people maybe created the database record with a capital B, but the URL has a lowercase b, so it's not going to find it because the wheres are case sensitive. Andrew says, is there a simple rule of how and when to use colon character before or after the symbol? If the symbol is standing alone by itself, then you want to use before. And if the symbol is a key, then you use it after. So remember, when I do this, that is the same as this. It's just a shorthand for this. I actually kind of wish that they never even introduced this one because it's just too confusing. But so I hope that makes sense. But this is just a shorthand for this one that makes it look a little bit nicer. But really what's happening is the second one. So it's the symbol beforehand, and then the value is a string hello. So that's the simple rule. The simple rule is that if the only time you ever put it after is when you're specifying the key when defining a hash. So you're doing something like this, name hello. Or when you're passing like an argument to a function. Okay. Rajesh says, is redirect to a kind of return / method call from the function? No. Redirect to is just another method call. It's just a call to a method called redirect to. And if you call it, then Rails will know that because a redirect has already happened, it doesn't need to render the action. So it's just a regular method call, the same way that render would be a regular method call. So in here, by default, it looks like this, render index. This is just a call to a method called render param index, right? Like we've talked about, the real way that you could write this is like this. It's just a call to a render method. Same thing with redirect to. Redirect to is just a method call. Because remember, in Ruby, you can leave these parts off. So when I do redirect to like that, it's not a return. It's just a call to a method called redirect to. Anonymous attendee says, when adding a new album, yes, that is correct. The thing you wrote is correct. I'm going to go over that in a minute too. Johnny, the reason that that's not working, you spelled first wrong, or you might not have a chat in your database, but it should be chat.first, first. Alice says, once I started using resources, my show pages seem to fail to feed an ID to param, so I get nothing back. We're going to cover that today, but hopefully if you still don't understand it after I go through the homework, definitely let me know and I will try to explain more. But when you want to add a song to the album, what would the form look like? We're going to cover that today, just in a minute. And Rajesh says, so if redirect calls a method which has no relevant file.html.erb or render, it would error. That's correct. Yeah, so it's not actually redirect calling anything. It's if you did say redirect to root path. Now remember, this is the same as writing this, right? And then root path itself is also just a method. So this is actually what it's doing. It's redirect to a single argument, which is a call to the method root path. So of course, if instead you wrote root path, it's going to break because root path is not a method, only root path is. I hope that helps explain what's happening. Redirect to, there's no magic. It's just a method call. Okay, let's dig into the homework. So session 10, the first part is to create a model that represents an album, and that albums have name and they have an artist name field. So when I hear to create a model, the way I create a model is with Rails G model, and then the name of the model. And when I do that, it's going to create a bunch of files. But the important one is the migration. So let's open that up. Now remember, we're supposed to have a string, which is a name. And we're supposed to have a string, which is an album name. Or sorry, artist name. Okay. For the most part, I've been removing this, but I mean, you don't have to. You can leave it. I'll remove it for now. So now let's run Rails DB migrate. Okay, so now we've created our table. All right, next we're going to create a model that represents a music song. And it says that songs have a name and they belong to an album. So when you think of belong to, again, what I want you to think of is a has many and a belong to. Those pair to each other. So we will Rails G a model called song. Let's pop open that migration file. In here, remember songs have a name, which is a string. Oh man, name, which is a string, and they have an integer, which is the album ID. So remember, this field is how we reference which album by ID, which album a song belongs to. Okay. And then we'll Rails DB migrate. So now we've created our songs table. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the relationship between the songs and the albums. And the way that I do that is that a song belongs to an album. And then an album has many songs. And just like to spend a little bit of time going in here and talking about them, I can now do album.create, which will have a name, and it will say album 1 as the artist name created by John. I can assign that to a variable called album, and then I'm able to do album.songs.count 0, album.songs.create name song 1. Okay, and then I can do album.songs.count, and now it's 1 because we've inserted one song into that album. So that's just kind of the basics of how we're going to work with songs and albums. Okay, so exercise 2, and there's a note here that says, be sure to use resources. Also, if you have questions about the things I've described just now, make sure you're dropping them in the chat because that's going to help. Okay, so be sure to use resources. We want to create an index page that lists albums. Okay, so we know that we need some kind of a resources set up for albums. So let's go over to our routes file, and we're going to create a new resource called resources albums. Okay, and links to an individual show page. So those two things we get set up for free, because remember when we use resources, we get index, show, edit, update, new, create, destroy. These are all the things that we get when we use resources. So we automatically get index and show kind of pre-wired up. It's just sitting there waiting for us to use them. Okay, and then we want to make it so the index page shows each of the songs on a given album. We can do that, right? In order to do that, let's open our server real quick and take a look at what happens when we go to open in browser. We're going to go here and it's going to connect, blah, blah, blah. And once it connects, I will go to /albums. Okay, now in /albums, what does it say? It says undefined, uninitialized constant albums controller. And the reason it says that is because, of course, we haven't created our albums controller yet. So let's open up a split where we can do that. And we'll use generate again. So this time we're generating a controller and it's called albums. And then our most important file here is this albums controller. So if we refresh again, we'll see that the error changes. And now what it's saying is, hey, the routing's set up correctly, but you haven't defined an action called index yet. So let's go define one. And in our index action, we need to be able to give access to all of the albums. So we'll create an instance variable called albums, which holds album.all. Now to pair with this controller action index, we need to create a Rails view. Rails has already set up the controller, or sorry, the view directory here for us. So all we have to do is create a new file. We're going to call it index because that's the name of the action. And then we'll do .html.erb. And then here, I'm going to just write for now, h2 all albums. When I save that, we can refresh and we can confirm that we have wired up our albums page. our ratio says, what would be the difference between album ID as a string or as an integer? When you get params in the controller, they're always going to be strings. So when you pass maybe an ID to where, Rails knows, okay, if you're passing an ID in, then I need to convert this string into an integer for you. So it does that transparently without you having to know about it. So now we know here that we have the albums instance variable, and we want to be able to each over the albums. So we'll do something like this. And then in here, we'll put a div and we'll put out the album name. Save that, refresh here. And now you're going to see album 1. Okay. And we want to be able to create also a show page that shows each of the songs on a given album. Okay. So next to the album, I am now going to go create a link. I'm going to do link to. I'm going to write view as the link name. And then I'll do album path of album. We refresh. Now we have album 1. I'm just like realizing for a second that the word album is a very weird word. Just kind of, I don't know, something about it. So that gave me, I just had to like verify that I'm spelling it correctly. So let's click view. Okay, so we have a URL /albums/1. We go to it and we can see that Rails has already put it together. And the only thing that we have to do to make it work is we have to define this show action. So let's go back to our albums controller and let's define the show action. It looks like this. Inside the show action, because now this is about a single action, we need to be able to get that action. The way that we get the action is we have a params that's been put there for us, and it's always called the same thing. It's always called ID. Okay. So then if we want album, album is equal to album.where ID is album ID dot first. And remember, if we want, we can write this instead like this, find by ID album ID. Okay. Now it's saying that there's no template for albums controller show. And that's right, because we haven't implemented one. So let's go to the albums directory, make a new file, show.html.erb. And in here, because we define the instance variable album, we can actually make this page say the album name at the top. And then we want to go through each of the songs. So we can do album.songs.each do song. And then in here, we'll have a div, which will have a song.name. And we can even, another thing I think that I skipped out, we can do album name by album.artist name. Okay, so if we refresh, now we can see album 1 by John, song 1. We may as well also include a link back all albums, and that will just say albums path. Remember, that's just a method call, just like all the other ones. So it really is this albums path, but it's Ruby, so we're going to leave it off. Okay. Erica, what do you mean? Are you working? So I click that. I can go back to the album view. I can click in and out of the albums. Okay, so that's our index path. And that is our show path. Okay. Andrew says, can you please explain album.songs.create? Okay. So when you do album.songs.create, I think we saw this earlier with chat.messages.create, that the reason that it works, and let's open up the Rails console again so that we can look at it together. we have album is album.first. Now, when I do album.songs, I can call any method on songs that I could call on album or song by itself, meaning the class. So I can do album.songs.first, or I can do album.songs.last, or I can do album.songs.count. And alongside those, I can do albums.songs.create. So when I do album.songs.create, say I do album.songs.create, that is the same as saying, so imagine I passed in here the name of the song. That's the same as saying song.create, name song, album ID, album ID. These are the same. So rather than have to create the full song object and pass it all of the things that it needs, you can actually just create it through album.songs. Okay. Julie says, at some point, can you go over when you replace the album's path album with album? I can't remember the example you provided and why you're able to do that, if you should do that. Yeah, sure. So here, when I do all albums and I have albums path, because it doesn't take in any arguments, I actually can do, instead, if I want, I can write this as albums. These are the same. So instead of calling the method albums path, I can just pass the symbol albums and that'll work the same way. So if I refresh, I can show you that these are the same. They work exactly the same. And if you want to do something like that for an individual album, I can also show you how that works. This is the index page. This is the link to an individual album. If you pass just the album itself, these two are the same. So if you pass an album by itself, Rails will assume that, hey, this person's probably not trying to create a link to like the object album. What they're probably trying to do instead is create a link to the page that represents the album. So what it'll do is it'll say, let me find a helper called album path and let me pass album to it. So this line is essentially the same as this line. But if you don't understand that, don't worry about it. You can just use the full written helpers and they work the same way. So I've switched to trying to use the full helpers just because I don't want to confuse anyone. Erica says, so there's no need for a param to albums path. That's correct, because albums path is about all of the albums. There is no param. Okay, so it says include a link on the individual album page back to the album index. So I already did that, so I'm going to skip it. Okay, exercise 3 says create a form that allows adding a new album via the index page. And it says as a note that each form should redirect back to the page that it was created on after creation. Okay, we can do that. So it says on the index page, we want to create a form, and that form is for a new album. And remember, this is how we create the forms. Inside of this form, we need a text field for the name of the album. We also need a text field for the name of the artist. And then we may as well create a submit button while we're in here. Just so that we can know which one is which, I'm going to add placeholders, which is going to put the little gray text inside the box. So for each of these, I'll just put a little placeholder. Okay. So now if I go back to that all albums page, you'll see my form. And this is the form by which I can create a new album. So we'll create an album called Quer with QWERTY as the owner. And when I submit that, it says the action create cannot be found for album controller, which is true. While we created the form, we haven't actually created the thing that the form submits to. So we just go do that. Let's go to the albums controller and let's implement a create endpoint. Now we need to be able to get the album name, which is in params of album name. And we need to get the artist name, which is in params of album artist name. And then we need to create the album. which is album.create. The name is the album name, and the artist name is the artist name. And then after creating, we need to redirect back to the place where we were before, which again is the albums path, because that's where we started at. So redirect to albums path. Now, if I refresh and resubmit, you'll see that I'm able to create an album. Okay, now my albums here, they don't have the artist name, so we'll fix that real quick in our index controller. I'll write album name by album artist name. Let's refresh, and now you can see quarter by QWERTY, and it got added for us. So if I wanted to say that I am having a new album called Blue by Johnny, let's click create, and now it's going to show up here. So that's the first part of session 3, or sorry, exercise 3. And the second part is to create another form that allows adding a song to an album. We learned how to do that yesterday, and it's via nested routes. Okay, so I'm going to go to my controller again. And we have an album page, and we have an album show page, and now we need a way to create a song inside of an album. So the easiest way to do that is to set up a nested resource for songs. So albums and then songs inside of it. And then when we go to the show page, we can go create a form. And when we create a form here, the form is actually going to be for a new song, and the URL will be album songs path, and pass the album. So I went pretty deep on this yesterday, but just to tell again, this is the thing that we're creating the new thing of. And then the URL next to it is where the action should actually send the form to when they click submit. And the reason that it's this is because it has to be, it's nested resource. So the first resource is album, the nested resource is song, and then we have to pass the album that we're creating the song for. And I'll show you what that does in the view in just a second. So build in. Okay. So if I go in here and I click into an album, oh, I broke it. This should be that album. Okay, so if I go in here and I inspect the form, look at the form and look at the action. It's /albums/3/songs. And that's what we're getting with the nested resources, is we're including the ID of the album in the place that we're sending it to, so that when we go create a song, we know which album to put the song onto. If that doesn't make sense to you, I would go back and watch yesterday's lecture, because I think yesterday when I did the second version, when I tried again to explain it a little bit deeper, I did an okay job explaining it. So Paula Wason says, where are these helpers coming from? Model path and model innermost path. So those helpers are defined. I'm not going to talk too much about where they're defined. They're defined on another a module that is included into application record. Okay, so you are inheriting from application record, and application record has inherited a module that defines those helpers. Or sorry, included a module that defines those helpers. So you get them here and you get them inside of the views because they are actually essentially implemented on ApplicationController. Julia J says, I tried to get more information for Form 4 in the Rails guide, but all I see is form with. I didn't want to look further, but wanted to get your thoughts. Let's see. I find that pretty surprising. Okay, yeah, I mean, it looks like form with is going to be used the same way. It looks like a replacement basically for for form 4. So I mean, you can use either. If you're finding more help with form width, it works very similarly. I can also paste in this guide real quick, which is a guide on using form 4. So, either way you want to go. I'm teaching form width though. Rajesh, I'll explain that in just a second. Okay, so here I can type in 1. And when I click create, we're going to get an error again. This error is saying that we have not created a songs controller. So the way that we create a controller, again, is Rails G controller songs. And when we do that, we get a new file. And if I refresh again, it's going to tell us the next error, which is the action create could not be found on songs controller. So that's because we haven't implemented it. So let's implement create. And I think I did this yesterday. Maybe this was helpful, but I'm going to show quickly what the params look like here. So here's what the params look like. There's a song object. There's a song item on the params hash. And inside of it, there's another hash which contains the name. So when we want to get the song name, that means that the name will be equal to params song name. And then also alongside that, there's this param called album ID. So we can actually grab the album ID by doing params of album ID. Now that we have those two pieces, we can go create the song. So we just grab the album, which is album find by ID album ID. And then the album.songs.create, where the name is the name. And then we need to do a redirect. And because we want to redirect back to an individual album, we will use album path and pass it album. So we got the name, we got the album ID, we got the album, create the song, and then redirect back to the form where we had originally started. So if I run this, you're going to see that now I can create songs on the albums. We could even, if we wanted to, we could go to that base view. And we could say, instead of writing just view, we could write view album songs.count songs. Boop. Okay. Kind of try implementing the new method. Yes, I will do that. That's the next thing I'm going to do. So we dug into this a little bit yesterday, but what people are asking is that rather than putting the form here, they'd like to see me create a new page to put the form into. So I will do that right now. So right next to the form, I'm just going to do link to, and I'm going to say new album. And then next to new album, I'll just do new album path, which remember is just another method again, new album path. So let's refresh the page. When we do that, you see that instead of it erroring, which like, imagine I made a typo here, and instead of new album path, I wrote new album with no U path, and I refresh, that is going to error. So when I write new album path, Rails knows already, that should prove to everybody here that Rails already knows what new album path actually means. So if I click inspect here, you'll see that it's already got a path /album/new inside of this link. So let's click it and see what happens. And when I click it, it says the action new could not be found for albums controller. So when you see that error, all you have to do is go implement new. So we'll implement a new method called new. And in here, we don't really have to do anything. And the reason will become apparent once I go implement the view. So let's do that. The view will be inside the albums folder. It'll be new.html.erb. On this page, I will add a heading that says new album. And then I'm going to just go back to my my index view where I have that form, and I'm just going to grab the form. Then we go to new, I just paste the form in. Okay, so now look what happens. Now I have a new album page that looks like this. I can even add, if I want, I can add a cancel button, link to cancel, and that'll just go back to albums path. Okay, so here's what it looks like now. It looks like all your albums, click new album, you get this new page. And this form just works. Like we already built the form. And that should highlight the difference for you between new and create or edit and update, which is that new is the place, is this page. Okay, and then create is when you click this button, it makes another request to the web server. That's create. So that's why there has to be two of them. One shows you the form, and then one handles actually submitting the form. They're two separate things. So the reason that it worked automatically is because we had already defined what happens when you submit a form. All we had to do was define what the form looks like. So before, because we had not had the new endpoint, we had just been putting the form on this page. All we had to do is move it, and it continues to work. And because like Rails routing wired everything up, it's going to continue to work no matter what. So I hope that answers the two questions that were sitting here about that. Do people want to see me do the same thing for albums, to move create song into a new page? Okay. So here's my album page. Remember, this is the album show page. So let's take a look at the album show page. And you can see that right now I just have a form sitting here on the page. Now, ideally, what I want to do is I want to create a new view, call it new.html.erb, inside of songs, new.html.erb. And ideally, the way that I want it to work is I want to be able to do this. I want to be able to say new song for album name. And then I want to be able to take this form and I want to be able to drop it right in there. Okay. So I've taken my form and I've moved it into a new view. So that's our goal, is to make that work. Now, what do we need in order to make a view that looks like this? Well, the first thing we need is we need a link to it. So it will be new album song path, and we'll have to pass the album. Okay. So now if I go and I look at this, you'll see it says new song. Now when I click it, it's going to say this. It's going to say no. It's going to say that it can't find @album, and that's true. And the reason it can't find @album is actually because we never even defined the new controller action. So because our new view needs something called @album, that means that our controller action has to define something called @album. So how do we do @album? Well, it's cool because we already have the code sitting right here. So we have album ID, which is params of album ID. And then we have this thing that creates album. So all we can do is take album and we can turn it into an instance variable. Okay. So when we do that and I refresh the page, you'll see now that we have this form. We can type in here and we can create songs. Okay. Yes, we could dry it up. So I'll do that real quick, just so that people know that that's the way that we're thinking. Yesterday, we learned about a thing called before action, which would allow us to implement something like load album. And that's going to say for these two, I want to call load album. And I don't have to put any kind of only because all of these need to be able to load the album. So then I will make a method called a load album. Now, when I do that, there's something kind of interesting going on here, which is that, remember, these two look the same, but they're not exactly the same, right? So the album ID is the same, but then on the second line, this one creates an instance variable called album. This one just creates a local variable called album. So in order to dry them up, I actually need to make them look the same. So the way that I'll make them look the same is I'll change this to add album. Now, because I did that, I have to change all of these to add album. And now you'll see that these two lines are the exact same thing as these two lines. So because they are, I can just grab them and move them into load album, and then I can delete them from both the places. And that's it, just dry it up. Eric asked, where is before action defined? Same thing, it's on a module that's included into ApplicationController. So you get it as a method for free by inheriting from ApplicationController. Oloason is asking the difference between a few different route helpers. So I'm going to go through them again, just real quick. Okay, so the first one is linked to all albums path. So when you do albums path, that's going to link to your index view like this, /albums. Okay. There's a shorthand for that, which if you want to learn it, you can, but it is super, super not required and actually might confuse you. It just looks like that. So these are the same. They both do the same thing. They work the same way. The second one gets turned into the first one. Okay. The next one is linked to an individual album. So you would pass album.name for the first argument. Then the second argument will be album path of album. What this will link to is the show endpoint, which is /albums /album ID. In this case would be 8. Okay. And then if you want to learn it, again, you don't have to learn this because it is kind of confusing. This is the same thing. So again, this second one gets turned into the first one. Sorry. So the second one gets turned into the first one. Okay, so that's the explanation of what these 4 different things do. And it is not a silly question. Okay, bring that back for a second. So Erica says, why no colon for the second one? So I'm guessing you're saying why no colon here? And it's because the thing you're passing is not a symbol, it is a variable called @album. So in this case, you're passing a symbol because there is no object for you to pass. This is why I think these second forms are maybe a little confusing, and you should just kind of steer clear of them. I think these make a lot more sense. Rajesh says, new album song path, albums one obj. Why not something else like new album songs path? How are we supposed to know which one to use? And then please explain in all caps. So the reason that it is new album song path is because that's how you would say it, like in conversational English. And Ruby is trying to, or sorry, Rails is trying to build the path to be the most obvious. So you would say, they just kind of go in order. So the way that it builds the path is first it puts new at the front, and then it puts the album, then the nested thing song, then path. And if you read it, you can think, well, I want the path that you use for adding a new album song. So that's why they name it that way. That's just the way that it works. I don't know if this is going to confuse things more, but if you wanted, you could also write this like this. So you could make your link to new song on album, and you can make it be that. And what maybe this is clearer to you. So it's new is the action, and then you have in order the nested resources that you're using. So the first one is album and then song. So this is actually how Rails builds this path, is it just takes the three things and puts them together. You want new, album, song. Johnny says, why do you use the @ ? Yeah, the reason you have to use the @ remember, is because that's the only way that you can access album here. There is no local variable called album. We need to be accessing the instance variable album. And that is coming from the, so here we are inside of new, right? So if I go over here into albums and songs new, you'll see that my before action is defining @ album. So that's the album that we're picking up inside of the view. Basically, any instance variables that you create in the controller are accessible from inside the view. So that's how we get data from inside the controller to inside the view, is we use instance variables. So if you're trying to access something that you've passed from a controller into a view, it's always going to have this @ sign before it. Rubina says, so you don't have to write the action names in before action. That's correct. If you don't write them, then it applies to all of them. So if you have something that applies to all of them, you don't need to write only. Anonymous attendee says album song path versus album songs path. Yeah, okay, I will try to explain that real quick. So you have album song path. This would be for an individual song show page for an album. And you would have to pass an album to it. You'd also have to pass a song. This is the show page of a nested resource, right? So this is the resource albums, and then the resource songs, which is nested inside of it, its show page, the album song page. And then you have album songs page, which is the index page for all songs on an album. This is resources albums, and it is resources songs index. And this should make total sense, and I will try to explain why. Let's look at how the paths work for the resources, the album's resources. Okay, so if we had album path singular, that is an individual album show page. And remember, if we have albums path, that doesn't take an argument, and it is the index page for all albums. Okay, so if the thing right before path is singular, then you're talking about the individual show page. And if the thing is plural, then you're talking about the index page for that same thing. So just to really draw it out, let's say you have a resources albums. The show page is album path of album. The index page is albums path. The new page is new album path. The destroy page is also album path. The edit page is edit album path, album. Now, if you had resources albums with resources songs inside of it, the index page is the album songs path, and it takes in an album. Show page is the album song path, which takes in an album and a song. The new page would be the new album song path, takes in an album. And the edit page is the edit album song path, which takes in an album and a song. Is this helpful, seeing this all written out here? Okay. And then obviously, if you were to nest something else inside of here, you can just keep going. So if you had resources, albums, and you had resources, songs, and then inside of that, there was resources, artists for an individual artist on a song, you can do the same thing. It's album, song, artists, path. Takes in the album and takes in the song. The show page would be album, song, artist, path. It takes in the album, the song, and the artist. The new page would be new album, song, artist, path, which takes in the album and the song. And the edit page is edit, album, song, artist, path, which would be album, song, and artist. So you can keep implying the same thing, and deeper. Okay. And yes, all of these names are happening because of resources. They make these super nice names that make it really easy to make all these paths and in a consistent way. Rajesh says, can you explain again the new and edit for two nested resources? I can in a minute. So I think I just covered new, but I can cover edit if it's helpful. So I'll cover edit really quickly. And then Rajesh also says, so this is mugging up, since if we use the wrong one, it errors. Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's the point of the whole thing, is that if you use the wrong one, it's not going to work. And then you're going to realize that you're using the wrong one, you're going to fix it. So I think Rails is very good about giving you a bunch of tools and then also telling you when you're using the tools incorrectly. If you didn't have these Rails route helpers, you would just typo something and then your page would have a broken link. So I prefer the error in development to putting out a page that doesn't work. So I'll implement really quickly the edit page for an album. So I have an album here, and I want to be able to edit the name of the album. So what I'll do is I will link to edit. I'll write edit, and I'll write edit album path, which takes in an album. Okay, so let's go back, refresh. Okay, so now I have an edit button here. I'm gonna click edit. I click edit, it says, oh, the action edit can't be found on the albums controller. Well, we can fix that. Let's go to the albums controller and let's go implement edit. So again, edit needs to get the album ID and it needs to get the album, which I realize I could dry these up. I'm not going to do that right now just because I want to save time. So now I have the edit here. If I go down into the views, now I need to create an edit view, which is edit.html.erb. And I can write something in here. I'll just write h2 and I'll write editing album name. And in editing album name, I will want to put the form, which I already have a form that's pretty much like the one I want. So what I'm going to do is take the form from new, and I'm going to put it in edit. And the only thing that has to change is instead of editing a new album, I'm going to edit an existing album. Everything else is the same. So if I refresh, now you see my edit page works, and it automatically has pre-filled in the values. And it's even changed my button to say update album instead of create album. So let's change it to album 2. Let's click update album. And then what it says is the update action could not be found in the albums controller. So this hopefully shows you the difference between edit and update. Edit shows the form. Update is what happens when you actually submit the form. So we've implemented the show the form, but not the actual update part. So let's go do that. Let's go implement the update endpoint or update action. So in here, next to edit, I will add update. Now update also needs the album. I already have code that does that, so I'm going to keep it. And then I want to be able to update the name, which will be available to me as params of album name. And I want to get the artist name, which will be available to me as album of artist name. Then I need to update the album, which I already have here. So I will just do update name is name, and artist name will be the artist name that was submitted. Then I need to do something. So I will redirect. And in this case, I'll just redirect to the album path, which will bring me back to the album itself. So if I run that, see now it says album 2, and click edit, change it to album 3. Oh, it's not by John. It's by Julian. Oop. There it is. Cool. Okay, we spent a lot of time redoing the homework, but I hope that this part was helpful. Now we do have to get into some new things. So get ready to learn some new things. Okay, the first thing I want to teach today is the idea of sessions. So you probably noticed, and I think someone asked about authentication the other day, about like when you want a user to be able to log in and then stay logged in over time. Most websites do that. They allow you to do something and then know something about you over time. So the way that they do that is a thing called session. So what session is it is a piece of code that runs inside of Rails. So Rails handles all of this for you. And it holds on to information about the user who's using the web page. So if I have 2 separate web browsers on 2 separate computers, they're going to get 2 separate sessions. So you can actually keep pieces of information in there. The way kind of under the hood or whatever that they work is they are powered by cookies, which is a crucial part of the internet. So a little piece of information is stored in a cookie, and then the sessions are stored in Rails, and those 2 work together to be able to provide you a way to keep information between sessions. And I'm going to try to show you how they work. So imagine I wanted to, let's go back to our home controller. And I'm just going to go to the, I think we had a controller that did basically nothing. So this, this say hello one looks pretty good. Or maybe let's just go to our index one, and I'm going to modify my index route so that it doesn't do really anything. So instead of the render call, I'm going to do render plain, and I'll just write hello world. So let's refresh that. And now we're back to just plain text again. I find that it's sometimes easier to think about things than just plain text because it takes away a lot of the complexity. So here's just a plain text. And what I will do here is I'm going to put something into a session. If you put on the end of a URL that, Okay, so I'm going to put something into a session. The way you put something into a session is you do session. And you can treat session, it's not a hash, but you can treat it just like a hash. So on session, I'm going to put the name, and I'm going to say the name is John. Okay, so I'm going to go to this page. Oh no, I broke it. The way that that's supposed to be is like that, of course. So if I refresh it, nothing happened, nothing changed. But I want you to imagine that behind the scenes, what happened is that what Rails has done is it's remembered that this browser is owned by a John. Okay. And now to prove to you that that is what's happening, I'm going to open my routes file and I'm going to implement a new route. So I'm going to say get other. And I'm going to have it go to the controller home and the action other. So now if I go back to my home controller, I'm going to get rid of all this just to make it so it doesn't confuse people. I'm going to write other. Okay. And I'm going to write render plain other world. Okay. So now look, we have the base page, which just writes hello world. And if I go to /other, we have another page that writes other world. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is in here, I'm going to output session of name. And I'm going to refresh the page and you'll see that it says John. Now, what's really cool about that is that other has somehow remembered something from index. So remember, we went to the index route and it put something into the session. It set the name to John. And then on the other route, we are able to access the session name and get that thing that we put in back out. So we put session in, and then we get session out. Okay. Nope, there's no need for an at session. Again, just like a lot of other things we're covering, is just a method that you get from inheriting from application controller. Okay, so it's just a method that returns a hash or a hash-like object. Okay, so we're able to set into session and we're able to get out of session. So you might be thinking, so what? Why would I want to be able to do this? And the reason you want to be able to do this is that sometimes when you have like a user that logs into a web page, you want to be able to remember things about them. So let's do something a little bit more complicated. Let's go here to our base and we'll do hello world. And here I want to output a number. And what I'll do for that number is I'll make the number equal to session of number. Okay. So let's refresh the page and we'll see nothing. And that makes sense because we've not put anything into session of number. Now let's add some more code. We'll say if session of number is nil, session of number equals 0. And now let's refresh the page and we're going to see 0. And we can refresh over and over again and we can see 0. But now imagine that I did this. Session of number equals session of number plus 1. So remember, this is an increment. And now let's refresh again. Every time I refresh, this number is going to go up. So now I'm making use of the session to be able to store information that Rails, even without a database, can remember from page to page for a given user. Okay. People are pretty quiet. Is this making sense? Okay, Isaiah says, what if a user switches to another machine? So the idea is that just like any web page, when you had a login form, you're only logging in on that computer. So when they switch to another machine, they would maybe log in again. They're going to have a different session. So every machine, every computer going to a web page has a different session. Actually, that's a good point. If I take this page that I've made and I go open it again, look, it still knows. And Andrea says, does it use cookies to store your session? And yes, it does. Abdi says, so is this how accounts get locked on password sensitive sites after X amount of attempts? For the most part, yes, I would assume that that's how this works. I mean, there's obviously, you can implement that many different ways, but this is definitely one way that you can implement that. Another way to implement it would be that you could have a number stored on your users table in the database, and that number would be called something like failed password attempts. And then every time that there's a failed password attempt, you would just make that number one bigger. Felipe says, is there a log file where all the sessions are recorded? There is not by default, and I will show you why. The reason is because by default in Rails, the sessions are stored in a cookie. So if I go here and I go to, what is it? Is it in here? We go to cookies. We go here and we go to, I don't even know where it is. So this value here, this long value, is actually the session. So that's where the sessions are stored. And then when they get pulled back to Rails, they get essentially taken out of this format and put into a format that Rails can use to give back to you again. Alternatively, Rails has a feature where you can say, rather than store the session in its entirety inside of the cookie, you can store just an ID, and then you can have a database of sessions. So I hope that answers your question, Felipe, because you could then look up the sessions in the database if you're interested in doing that. And what's cool about Rails handling the storing the sessions in the cookie the way that they do is because even though a user could technically see what the cookies contain, they can't change them because they would need the cookie signing key in order to make a cookie that that Rails would accept as the original. So just more security features built into Rails. So Selima says, can we put the code for clearing a session in 30 minutes or 60 minutes or anytime? So there's two answers to this. One is that you could very easily make that work yourself by just putting in your session, you say session like time to clear, and then computing when you want to clear and setting that in here. And then just basically don't honor any sessions that pass that amount of time. The other way is if you Google a little bit, you can find out ways to set the cookie expiration that that Rails uses, so it'll automatically clear after 30 or 60 minutes. Ernest says, is this how ad tracking apps work, by using session? So ad tracking apps do work by using cookies. So the same underlying technology that sessions use. So I guess, yeah, technically. Ernest says, following up, if so, can session be used in analytics app like Mixpanel segment IO? You can't put them into a third-party app because the sessions can only be accessed by the Rails app. because that's how cookies work. Felipe, yeah, a little bit. But they, you have a key that essentially references the real session. Okay, so let's see if we can do something with this. And in order to do something with this, I would like to show you another thing that has been kind of hiding here all along, but I think that is important to cover. So let's go back out of this render plane and let's start rendering a view again. Actually, let's do it down on this other endpoint. So I'm going to remove the render plane. When I review the render plane and I go to the route, we're going to get an error because we don't have an other template. So now let's go over to here. Let's go into the home directory and let's create a new file called other.html.erb. And we create that, we can say other. And now when we refresh, we've wired up our other page. Now I'm going to inspect the page and I'm going to show you what the source code to this page looks like. So this is the HTML of the page. Now, you probably remember that what I just wrote in the view is just this little piece here, the H2 of other, right? So what is all this other stuff? Where is it coming from? What's doc type HTML? What's HTML? What's head? What's title? Where, like, this title tag changes what's up here in the top. Where is this stuff? And I'm going to show you where is this stuff. And it's not from the browser. It is from a subdirectory inside of views called layouts. So if I open up layouts/application.html.erb, you'll see all that stuff that I was just talking about is sitting inside of here. So what the layout is it's a way to wrap every single page inside of your Rails application in the same type of stuff. So if you wanted to have maybe a global menu, or you wanted to have a header that goes onto all of your pages, you could put that in here. And then when you call yield like this with Ruby, with an ERB tag, it will take the code from your individual template, and that's the point where it will drop into the file. So imagine if I did here and I wanted to put H1 and I wrote John's site. Now let's go back here, let's refresh. Now you see I have John's site here. And if I actually go even to my base URL, well, it won't work there, but if I go to /cars, no, that's another one that we didn't do. Did we do restaurants? John's site. So now when you put in that layout, is going to show up everywhere. Yeah, Rails is very, very organized. It didn't work in those two examples because these are cases where we're using render plane. So there is no, if I look at the source code of this, for example, I can show you the source code. This is what the source code is. It's just nothing. It's just plain text. So it's render plane. If I show you an HTML page, for example, and I go do the same thing, go to that sources page, you'll see that it's all this HTML that we put out. So layouts only get included on the HTML documents because the HTML layout. And you know it's an HTML layout because it has application.html.erb. Okay, so imagine on here next to John's site, we want to be able to write out something from the session. So we can do that actually. We can just do session of number. Look, now it's here. And every time we refresh, it's not going to change because we're not incrementing it anymore, but it's going to stay there. So now what about if instead of storing number, we wanted to store something like the name of the user? How could we do that? Okay, so the way we're going to do it is first we're going to create a user model, or else generate model user. I'm going to remove that for now. And I'm going to go open this database migration. and we're going to put in string name. So for now, I'm just going to make our users have a name on them. So we'll migrate. And now I've created a user. Okay. So now let's very quickly create a controller that allows you to create a new user. So we'll do relsg controller user. Like I said, we want to be able to create a new user. So we'll do an action called new. And we can actually even go into our routes file. So let's open, we'll find it, config/routes. In here, I'm going to write, I haven't saved anything anywhere yet. So resources, users. Now remember, I get all of these things from resources users. So one of the things I get is new user. So let's create a link to new user. And just for fun, let's put that link inside of our layout. So we'll put new user, and then we'll do new user path. I'm also going to include a HR, which is a horizontal rule. So let's take a look at that. So now we have essentially our header section that was provided to us by the layout that we just made. And then we have our actual page down here. What's happened? So when we click new user, let's click it. Get that error. It says, oh, you haven't defined a user's controller. Like, well, I can define a user's controller, relsg controller users. Okay, in the user's controller, I will def new. Oh, I had mistakenly defined the user controller. So I'm going to write def new. If I save that, you'll see the next error, which is that we have not created a template for new. So this should all be pretty familiar now, I hope. So we'll go down to the users subfolder. We'll create a new file. We'll call it new.html.erb. And in here, we will create a form for a new user A new user has a text field which takes in a name, and it's going to have a submit button. Okay. So now when you click this, there's going to be a form for creating a new user. I'm going to type John in here and click create, and it's going to tell me the next thing I have to do, which is that I haven't implemented the create endpoint. The create action on the user's controller. So let's go do that. We'll do def create. Now in here, we're going to get the name, which is params of user of name. And then we're going to do user.create. That will give us back the new user that just got created. And then let's just redirect to the root. Now I'm going to add one extra piece here, which is I'm going to set on the session a property that is the ID of the user. So we create a user, and then I'm going to set a session property called user ID in order to hold on to the information about who I'm talking to. So let's refresh. And nothing changed, but let me go back to the restaurants page, and let's add a couple more pieces of information to our layout. So here's what I'm going to do in the layout. I'm going to say user ID, session of user ID. Refresh, and look what it has, user ID 1. Okay, so now when I refresh this and I go to different pages, it knows, when I click like new user, it knows that I'm user ID 1. Okay, so now we're really, really, really close to being able to have the site know something about me. So what if we wanted here, instead of user ID 1, to write the name of the user that is currently in the browser? Well, what we could do is we could change this code, and instead of this, we can do user.where, or sorry, we can do user.find by ID session user ID and .name. And that will output the user name. Refresh. Look, 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 look. It works. Okay. Now, I think it was Sarah is probably sitting out there and saying, but you told us not to use these capital names in here. So yes, I did tell you not to use these capital names in here. So how can we fix that? How can we not have to use the capital names in here? It's almost like what we want is we want to be able to say current user name here instead. So let's do that. Let's copy the thing we had before. Let's write current username. And look what it's going to say. It's going to say, hey, you're trying to use this current username thing in users new, but there's nothing called that. So let's go to our controller, which is the users controller. And let's do a def current username. And we don't need an @ sign on this because it is not an instance variable. It is a method. So when I refresh, it's going to say the same thing. It's going to say, hey, I can't access it. So the reason is because by default, these are actually not accessible inside the views. So the instance variables are accessible, but these are not. But there is a way to make them. You can do helper method, and you can pass current user name. So it's helper method, and then a symbol representing the method. So if I refresh now, it says, hello, John. So helper method is a way to take a method on your controller and make it available inside of your views. But check it out. If I go here, I go to restaurants, it's going to error. And it's going to say, hey, wait a second. There's nothing called current username. So that would mean that I would have to go take this and I'd have to copy it. And I'd have to go to restaurants controller and I have to write it again. But that's not very dry, right? We're trying to dry all the things up. And now I'm going to be copying this thing all over the place. That doesn't seem good. And there's a way to not have to do it because everything inherits from application controller. So if we want something that works the same everywhere, we can just open application controller. We can put our method in there. So now everything gets it because everything inherits from application controller. So application controller, because they're just classes, is a way to put things that are used everywhere. Now we can delete it from here. You can refresh the page. Now it's going to work everywhere. Anonymous attendee says, how do you undo creating user table and controller and instead of users? I actually think there is a way to do this. I think it's Rails D controller user. Yeah, so that's how you do it. You can just remove it with Rails D instead of Rails G, just the inverse. You see that it removed all the files as well. The application controller is not similar to public. It is the superclass of all of these. So when you put something on application controller, the way you should be thinking about it is it's as if you put that method on all of the controllers. It's like it's a global thing. I think I mistakenly just dismissed someone's question without answering it. Okay, our Reso says, should we define methods in controller when you create album.new or song.new, not to use capitals in view. Yes, your controller method should not use capitals. Oh, and you're saying, should we define these methods in order to not use the capitals in views? Yes, that is true. So if you're ever using like a capital class in a view, it's going to work. But for the most part, you should not do it. Even here, it's kind of, there are other ways to write this to avoid doing this. So if you're in index, the actual way that you would probably want to write this, realistically, form for restaurant.new. If you want to avoid it, what you can do is in your index, you can do @new restaurant equals restaurant.new. Okay, and then in your view, this would change to @new restaurant. So the same thing. So anytime that you're writing a capital class name in a view, it's probably not a good practice. And what you want to do is you want to take that thing and have it in the controller, either via an instance method or via a helper method defined on application controller. Okay, so already today we have just a few more small things, but already today we've learned about layouts. We've learned about sessions. We've learned about, what was the other thing? We learned about what was the other thing? Layout sessions. Oh, and how to define helper methods on application controller. So we learned about helper method. Okay. Another thing that happens pretty often is everyone understand this session piece? How we're able to take data and be able to put it onto session and be able to get it back out. So you could very, very easily imagine extending this idea. Imagine when you created a restaurant, you wanted to be able to track who created the restaurant. So you wanted to be able to write Al's created by John. It's like you already have all the tools to do that. So the way that you could do that is you could go into your application controller. Instead of current user name, you could define a method called current user. That would work very similar. It would just return the current user. And then when you create your restaurant, you could pass the user ID as just current user.id. Remember, you can access current user because it's defined on application controller. So you've created a session, you've created the ability to put something into the session and be able to get it back out. You can think of a session as basically just a hash that survives between requests. So if you ever need to get information, not just for authentication, but for any kind of feature, if you ever need to get a piece of information between requests, session is the way to do that. Anonymous attendee says, in what cases do you add methods to application controller? So I think you add them to application controller if they're used in more of your controllers. If they're not just used in one of your controller, then they're probably something that's more global. Then they're going to go into application controller. For example, this current user method, I need it on every single page because now I'm using current user name from the layout. So it's needed on every page. It's needed in every controller. So I have to define it in an application controller. Otherwise, every single new controller that I create, I'd have to define this method again. I don't want to do that. So instead, what I do is I define it on application controller, and then it's just available in all of my controllers. So I hope that answers the question. So Olawason says, what happens if you have current user in the home controller or any other controller? So I think you're asking what happens if you define current user again here. So imagine I wrote current username there and I defined it to foo. Then for all the restaurants, I'm going to override it. And that's just like what we learned when we learned classes. If you implement a method that the superclass has already defined, then you're essentially replacing it. So here on my restaurants pages, I will have hello foo. But if I actually go back to the root page, sorry, to the other page that we defined, you'll see it doesn't have the overridden. So you can override methods on application controller for only certain controllers. It's perfectly fine. Anonymous attendee says, to access methods from the application controller, do you always need helper method? If you want to access methods from the application controller in your views, you need helper method. If you want to access it from just subclasses, then you don't need it. So it's only if you want to be able to use these methods from inside of views. Oloason says, when you're calling the method current user.id, kindly explain that behavior. So I think you're talking about in the layout file. I think I had, oh, sorry, you're talking about in the restaurants controller. So here, I had defined a method called current user that returns a user object. So this is going to return the user object of the currently logged in user. And I need to be able to get the ID. So I have two options here. I can either get the ID by using session of current user, sorry, session of user ID, or I can get it by calling current user.id, because remember, current user is going to return the current user, and .id will take the ID off of that user object. Jessica says, do we need to add helper method in application controller? You only need to add helper method in application controller if you are accessing that method from a view, if you want to be able to use the thing in a view. So in this case, I added helper method current username because I want to be able to use current username inside of a view, specifically inside of the layout view. I want to be able to call it. So helper method is only used when you're inside of a controller and you want to be able to define a method that is available inside of the views. By default, you can't call methods from controllers in views. You can access instance variables, but you can't call the methods. So what helper method does is it says, okay, this is a method that I would like to expose to my views to be able to be called from my views. Oloason says, thanks. One more silly question. What differentiates a current user variable and a method? Yes. Okay, so this is a method, which is called just by current user. If I wanted to define a variable, I would have to be able to set a variable like this, and I would need to set it from somewhere. So imagine I went into the restaurants controller. I would need to do something like this inside of every single one, right? Now, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go in every single controller and do another current user equals user.find. I don't want to do that everywhere. So the method is a nice way to kind of wrap up that behavior so that I can define it once and use it in multiple places. Another way you could do it, if you really, really wanted to, is you could implement a before save that was called load current user. And what load current user could do is it could create that instance variable. So if you want to use instance variables, you need to do something like this. Helper method is just a way to not have to add a before save. And these are slightly different because if you implemented it like this before save, then it's always going to load the user, as opposed to this method down here, which will only load the user if it actually gets asked for by a view. Our Rasa says, why are we defining current user view as a method but not a verb? I think I just answered your question, but if not, let me know. Felipe says, in English grammar, help method would be the modal verbs. I'm not sure, but helper method is defining it. I want, like, when you think of the name, think about it as this is a helper method. This is help. Like, I'm saying this is a helper method. It's almost like saying a command. Like, I want to define a helper. Like, really, they probably should have named this define helper method, but they didn't. They called it helper method. So not a great name. It really should be called define helper method, but it's not. It's called helper method. So you're saying this is a helper method. This current user is a helper method. Okay, I'm going to show you one more thing here. Okay, so did anyone notice that when we implemented the albums page, we had a form that looked like this, and then on the new page, we had basically the exact same form. I think I even pointed it out when I copied the form. We have one form for new, and then I copied that form and I went to the edit page and I pasted the form into the other page. So I've made the same form in two places. So we want to be able to take that. Yeah, this is a wet approach. We want to be able to take that and have the same in both places. So what's the difference between them? I copied it from here. Sorry, I copied it from here. And I think I took album.new out, right? And then I replaced it with album. But other than that, the form's exactly the same. So how can I make them just be the same code? Because remember, when you want to dry something up, the first thing you want to do is you want to be able to take the two things that you want to dry up and make them the same. Because once they're the same, it's really easy to take that behavior and share it. So the first thing we have to do is we have to make them the same. In order to make them the same, I'm going to choose to do this thing where I call form_@album. And then to make that work, I'm going to go into our albums controller, and in the new, I'll just define @album to equal album.new. So now everything should work the same way, because I used to have album.new, and now I've defined @album to equal album.new. So now if I look at my edit form, it's form for @album. And if I look at my new form, it's also form for @album. Now these are exactly the same. So now the only question remains, we know how to create we know how to create private methods that we use inside of Rails, but how do we do that inside of a view? And the way that we do it is with a thing called partials. So a partial looks like this. We do render, and then we can do albums/form. Okay, so now let's go to our page where we have this, which is /albums. Go to new album, and you see here we have the new album, album.form. Oh, did I edit it on the wrong page? I put it on the edit page. So I'm going to copy that and put it on the new page. Okay. And it's going to error. And it's going to say, hey, you're missing a file. You're missing a file. You're trying to render this thing called album.forms, but you say album/form, but you haven't created it yet. And look what it says here. It's kind of interesting. Instead of it saying albums/form, like we wrote, it actually says that we're missing albums/_form. So the way that it works is that the partials are, you render like this, but the name of them actually starts with an underscore. So it's _form.html.erb. And for now, I'm just going to write, this is the form inside of here. And if I refresh it, you'll see that I've got this is the form here. And I can even click cancel and now go into the albums page. And if I click new song, sorry, if I click edit, you'll see that here it also says this is the form. The reason it says it in both places is because I've rendered it from the edit page. I've also rendered it from the new page. So we've taken a piece of markup that is the same in two places, and we've put it into a separate file that then we can call from the two places that it's needed. So now there's only one thing left to do, which is to take the form and cut it, bring it into our form and put it, and then go to the other place where it's called and delete the form. So now we have the edit form sitting in the edit file, and we have the edit form sitting in the new file. Let's go see if it works. Look, it works for edit. You can still edit things. And if I go to all albums, I click new album, this still works too. So partials, remember the couple takeaways here are that partials start with an underscore, and they are a way to be able to take a certain piece of ERB and only write it once, even though you're needing it in multiple places. Okay. And I will push my code. I'll actually do it right now so that you all can have it. Remember, if anyone ever wants to see my code, you can, I've shared my repository with you. So you'll have the CJON test repository. I saw this morning that I think there are 2 people in the organization that are not a member of that team. So if you're one of those 2 people, just email me and I'll fix it. But there's only 2 of you. So if you look at your repositories list, you should see CJON test in there. That is this repository. Do people see that? Is that working okay for people? Cool. Ernest says a method defined in application controller without designated as helper method can only be called by other controllers. That's correct. However, if that method is a helper method, it can be called in all views. That's correct. You nailed it. That's exactly right. So a helper method, a method defined in application controller or any controller. It's not just application controller, it's all the controllers. That is not say helper method on it is only a controller method. It can't be used in views. By writing helper method, you're basically saying to Rails, I want this method to be accessible inside my views. So that's exactly what you said, Ernest. Great. Okay. So we covered partials, we covered layouts, we covered, I forgot again. I have the list here. We covered helper method, and we covered sessions. That's a lot. It's another big lesson. This is also the end of our introduction to Rails. So we're going to be spending more time on Rails over the next couple of days to be able to cement the things that we've learned, but we're done spending time just in Rails. To overview what you've learned in Rails, you've got your models, you've got controllers, you've got your ERB views. Each of those has just so much stuff inside of it. You have all of the information about how to iterate inside of views, how to pass information between controllers and views. You got sessions, you got how to access models from inside of controllers. You have how to create forms. Just like if your mind hasn't exploded yet, then congratulations, because we've learned just so much. We've put so much in. So good job still being here and still sticking with it. You're doing a great job. And if I can help with anything, let me know. I do want to say what we're going to do tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll be learning about CSS, which stands for cascading style sheets. Cascading style sheets are a way to make the page look not like this. So we can make the page look different, and we can make it have some style to it. So we can change the fonts, we can change the colors, we can change some spacing. We can, yeah, there's a lot you can do with CSS, so we'll be digging into that. And I also want to encourage you to look into other ways to use Rails. There's a lot of parts of Rails that we haven't covered and will not cover in the class. For example, Rails has an entire framework called Action Mailer, which is used for sending email. There are model validations, which we haven't covered. There's more types of relationships and associations like belongs to and has many that exist in Rails. Really, it's going to be just spend time learning new things. Think of something you want to do and then figure out how to get there. And if you have questions and I can help, you can feel free to message me, or you can just message in the general chat. People are super helpful there too. Ernest asks, how many people are in today's class? I did not catch what it was at the peak. It is currently 64. I think it was a little bit more earlier. I think it was like 75. So I have a tally on my sheet here that I write every day, and I'll be writing 75 on the sheet. So actually, it's kind of amazing because, and I guess actually not very surprising, but we've seen a lot of fall off in the first 5 days. But then anyone that kind of made it to day 6, for the most part, has stuck around. So our fall off between, like, for example, the first lesson and the 5th lesson is like 74 people left. But between the maybe 5th lesson and now, only like 25 people left. So hopefully that encourages you to say that most people that have made it this far are very likely going to make it to the end. Erica says, do people use Rails in the back end with a different front end? Yeah, so this is the back end, right? The thing that is the server. The front end is typically JavaScript and HTML, which we're going to spend a little bit of time on kind of the last 2 days of the course. So we're not going to go too deep into it though. Anonymous attendee says, I couldn't understand anything today. Should I be panicking, or would the recordings help? Yeah, I would spend time with the recordings. I think I said this a couple times previously, but I don't think for the most part that people are going to leave the individual sessions and understand what's happening. I think that kind of the expectation, at least my expectation, is that you're sitting 1 or 2 sessions back from wherever you are at a given time. So I would say just keep watching the recordings, keep doing the exercises, make sure you're putting in the time on doing the exercises, because without the exercises, you're not going to understand anything. It's like watching a gymnast do like a bunch of twirls and stuff. It's like you don't learn by watching them do it. You learn by doing it, So like sometimes people might have this feeling where they're maybe watching me code and they're saying like, oh, you go so fast, you make it look so easy when you're doing it. I think I saw a few people write that today. That's understandable. I make it easy because, I make it look easy because I've been doing it for so long. The only way that you're going to get to the point where you make it look easy or it feels natural for yourself is you have to do it yourself. You have to type the code with your own hands, and you have to hit a problem and work through the problem. What I keep trying to do is I keep trying to show you what an error looks like. Maybe people have noticed this. I keep trying to maybe not define a template and then bring that error up so that I can show you how to work past it. That's the problem solving skills that everyone in the class needs to be able to get, because that's what engineers do. You run into a problem, you figure out a way around it, and then you keep moving forward. Alice says, if I still haven't received feedback on my work, should I be concerned? If it is about yesterday's if it's about yesterday's assignment, then don't be concerned, because I haven't had a chance to review all of the assignments from yesterday. If it's about in general for the whole course, then I'm not seeing your assignment, because I go to every single assignment and I message every single person that I see the assignment for. So if anyone's out there and you're at the point where you're submitting things but have not gotten any feedback from me, please message me on Slack and let's get it fixed, because something is wrong. Either you're not pushing the code to GitHub, you're pushing it to a private repository that I can't see, or something. So let's figure that out so I can give you the kudos for the work that you're doing. Okay, Alice? So definitely message me and let's figure out what's going on. And when you message me, it'd be helpful to for you to send the URL to your repository so I can make sure I can see it. Andrew says, can you name a few more large Rails Ruby, I guess, companies based on companies? Yeah, so Shopify, GitHub, Basecamp is, Groupon is. I went over a couple in the early sessions. I think that the first session. Dribble is, Goodreads is, I guess like most of Twitter still is, Airbnb is, Fiverr is. I mean, really, you should go look up the list because it's giant. Like Chowhound is, Funny or Die is, MyFitnessPal is. Many apps use Rails. Rajesh says, that was me. I finished all the sessions, but today I understood 0%. Just keep watching. Keep watching the recordings, and if you have questions, do those. And there's also study groups that are forming in the Slack channel. So if you're interested in spending more time with people from the class working through problems, those are also a great resource. Ernest says, John, what factors do you think have accounted for the current low popularity in Ruby on Rails? I don't think that Ruby on Rails is not popular, but if anything, it's just that like developers are fickle. So new technologies come out and they want to work in the new technologies. Even at GitHub, where we've been doing Rails for a long time, every once in a while, developers are like, we should rewrite everything in Haskell or something. And it's like, Rails, developers go where new, exciting things are. But Rails is a language that you can use for like maximum productivity. You can develop an application very quickly. So if, obviously I'm a fan, and I'm not a fan because it's new or because it's fun or exciting. I'm a fan because it helps me get my work done. Felipe says, do you recommend us also read code and try to understand it? Yeah, I think that is very helpful, to try to read code and just try to work through what it does. So there's a lot of code on GitHub that you can go read through. When can I post the project requirements? I'm going to do that in just a minute. Does GitHub use ERB files? Yes, they do. Felipe, Haskell is another programming language. It's Haskell, and it is very confusing. Rajesh says, I have a lot of unanswered questions. You can put them in GitHub. You can drop them on Slack. And if someone's not responding to you, just message me. Ernest says, rewrite GitHub in Haskell. There's absolutely no way that that's going to happen. That's just too much work. And also, like, all the developers write Ruby, and it's easy to understand Ruby. Okay, I'm going to go through the homework for today. Okay. Homework for today. Get my chat back up. Exercise 1, you're going to create a user model. Users have a name. Then I want you to create a comment model. Comments should have a body, and they should also have a user ID corresponding to the user who made the comment. And what I mean by that is that comments belong to users. The user has many comments. Exercise 2, I want you to implement a page which lists all of the comments that have been made along with the name of the user who made the comment. Okay, so I want you to be able to go through each of the comments and be able to list the comment and the user that is associated with it. So that'd be something like comment.user.name. You don't need nested resources to do this. Exercise, I'll fix that. Exercise 3, which here says 2, but I'll fix it right now. Exercise 3 is to create a form where someone can type in their name. When you submit the form, I want you to create a user object with that name and then store the ID of the user object on the session. So I did that today. Hopefully people can rewatch or spend time with today's lecture and figure out how to do that. Then I want you to create a method on ApplicationController, which allows retrieving that current user. And then finally, of course, I need you to implement a form which takes in the body of a comment and it puts it in the database along with the ID of the user. Okay, so you're going to create a form. It's going to hold on to the session, which is the ID of the current user, and then be able to create comments that have that user ID sitting inside of them. Yeah, it's okay if this isn't done by tomorrow. I realize this is a lot, but this is the next step. This is definitely the next step. And I will say that the homework for tomorrow will be easier because it's going to concern CSS. So hopefully over the weekend, you can spend time with a little bit of CSS and probably a lot of this. And yeah, I mean, if you're interested in doing it by tomorrow, all the more kudos to you because it's a lot. Hopefully people are seeing though that like yesterday's exercise and today's exercise are very involved, but they are making something real. They're creating some actual real piece of functionality. Okay, I don't understand exercise 4. So exercise 4 is you're going to have a list of comments. I want you to be able to have a form where you basically can type in a comment and hit save, and then it shows up in the list. And when it shows up in the list, it should say who it was from. So if you do this successfully, what you should be able to do is you should be able to go into one browser and see and be able to type something and have it be from, and then go to another browser and refresh the page and be able to see the comments from the other person and be able to talk back to them. So you should be able to create like a mini chat. Luis says, how do I know when to create my controller as singular or plural? They're always plural. There are cases where they should be singular, but like the home controller, for example, but just always create them plural, especially with resources, just plural all the way through. Realistically, even for the home controller, we could have named it homes controller. I just chose not to. But if you're going to use resources, plural is the answer. Cool. Any other questions about today? Are people happy that we're going to be taking a break from Ruby and Rails and stop learning new things for a bit? We're going to be learning different kinds of new things. Johnny says each model can have a controller. Yes, each model can have a controller. They don't have to be one for one, but that is true. Always in exercise 1 and exercise 3. Alice says, should it not work if the user doesn't set their name? Or do we just have to identify them by ID in that case? So yeah, I mean, I think it should still work. The name will just be blank. But I think you have kind of you're very maybe also pointing out that if you build this, one thing you might run into is that when you go to the page, it does not say, it will error if you maybe try to create one, but you haven't logged in as a user yet, you haven't typed in a user. So if you feel like handling that, you can. Otherwise, you can just maybe for now require that first you put a user in and then you do the thing. So, and another way to handle it would be you can hide the create message form if there is no current user. I hope that answers your question, Alice. So you could just put a conditional in the view around the form. Olawason says, is the same user model. Yes, exercise 1 and 3 should use the same user model. Resa says, are we going to stick to pure CSS or a framework? We're going to use a framework. We're going to use a framework called SCSS. And that's only going to come I don't even know if we're going to really use anything from the framework. Oh, and if you're talking about frameworks like Bootstrap or Primer, we're not going to use one of those. But I'll talk briefly about them and how to use one if you want to. No Tailwind CSS. Andrew says, it looks like my Codespaces Rails session is tied to my GitHub account. If I cannot open it in anonymous window, not sure how I can create a new session. Your Codespace, actually, this URL, I believe, should be accessible to, oh, you're right. You're right. So yeah, you won't be able to view this in two separate browsers. You're right. You would need to log into both browsers with GitHub if you wanted to do that. So you have a normal browser and then you have an incognito browser. They're both logged into GitHub, and then they'll each have their own session. Because remember, the session is not tied to GitHub. The session is tied to the browser. Felipe, could you please show how to look up your repository? How to look up my repository? Sure. So I will show this, which is what you'll see. And there will just be here. So if you go to just github.com/allaboardbootcamp, you'll have my repository and you'll have the questions repository and you'll have your own repository. You won't see these two. Olawason says SCSS like SAS, and yes. All right, cool. I'm out of questions. So I will see you all tomorrow. We're going to learn some CSS. You're welcome, Johnny. See you tomorrow. Olawason path is available without resources as long as you're using as. And in some cases, you get it even if you don't use as. But yeah, so you can get it either way. You can get it via resources or via as. All right, bye.